Hello. Thank you for joining us here today on the Ravori Sports Podcast. Like and subscribe to all of our social media content. So definitely check us out here as well. Definitely Genesis Notary Services. If you do live in the Winchester, Virginia area, if you know, definitely too. Check out all of our notary. Thank all of you in the Winchester Shenandoah Valley. I'm really appreciative of all the support you have shown. Harris Legal Shield. So definitely check that out if you do need Legal Shield. I am here as well. Legal Shield is a great resource. You young people, get a will, protect yourself. You great value with what a lot. You save me so much money with Legal Shield as well. And also to as well, ravorisports.company.site. We got a Ravens jersey change. We got new Orioles City Connect jerseys as well. Check it out. No introduction needed for the guests. If you've been watching Baltimore sports like me for the last 30 years as well, you know exactly who this is. So this is Goats in the Building is how I introduce him off camera here as well. I think this was the guy I listened to personally the most growing up. You know, we're going to start with a little bit of a story here. There was this little long time ago in the 80s, there was this little boy who went with his mom and he walked. It was a rainy day and he lived in Owings Mills and he was walking there through the new area in Owings Mills. You know how that was new back then, the mall in the 80s and all that, right? He walked and there was this radio event and he was hoping to see this sportscaster that was there. He was there with his mom. He got there to the WCBM booth and the guy had left. So he's here today. Phil Wood is here as well to talk to all of us as well. I think it's a pleasure to meet you, sir, in terms of that. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for taking the time as well to talk to us.
Well, I'm sorry I missed you back in the 80s. I can't imagine that many people were there that I would have had to, wait for a long time. But anyway, it's I came to WCBM in 1982, and actually I came to be part of the Colts broadcast, and I did the Colts pre- and post-game show their last two seasons in Baltimore. And actually, I was the last voice anyone heard on a Colts broadcast after their last game in the 83 season before they loaded up the Mayflower van and headed to Indianapolis.
I did not know that you did Colts. I didn't really, that kind of predated me a little bit in terms of that. Like, because that story I told you, I wasn't anything but 8 or 9. So, like, the Colts, like, my age is, I'm going to be 49. We don't really remember the Colts. Like, 83, I was too young to really remember. I barely remember the 83 World Series a little bit. Probably only because we won the World Series do I remember any of that as well. So I didn't even know you did the Colts as well. But
oh yeah, well the thing is, the Baltimore Colts, when I was a kid, were the hottest thing in the National Football League, and kids playing sandlot football, everybody wanted to be Johnny Unitas, and I did a show with Johnny Unitas for 2 seasons in 2000 and 2001. And he was a remarkable guy and obviously an icon, sports icon, but just as I would say self-deprecating as any great player could possibly be. I mean, he was a guy who hated to talk about himself, and that's all anybody ever wanted to talk about was Johnny Unitas. But then I did a show with Art Donovan, Colts Hall of Famer, for 9 years on Monday nights. From a local restaurant in Baltimore. And that was a real trip too, because Artie was a real character. And one thing.
Did he even watch games, Art Donovan?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he didn't even need to, right? I mean, he would just go on and just tell a funny story. And I remember he used to kill Jim Kelly. I used to watch it like, oh, Jim Kelly is just go ahead.
I first was exposed to Donovan when he was doing color commentary on Colts games on Channel 13 in Baltimore, and they were playing a preseason game against Denver, and Denver had a receiver named Haven Moses, who was a terrific player, and but throughout the course of the game, Artie kept calling him Moses Herman, and no one ever corrected him. So anyway.
Um, so you've had a long career here as well. Obviously, you've seen it all. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now. The Orioles, what's going on.
Yeah.
So as we're recording this, 3 in a row in Chicago. Um, Definitely two. They went out and did something they haven't done very often. Spent a lot of money getting Pete Alonso in the offseason. They went ahead, they got Taylor Ward, who's looked good so far. What do you think of the Orioles here so far in terms of what they've done? Some people are a little disappointed, but it's still early.
Well, Charles, a year ago, prior to the 2025 season, the expectations were extremely high for the Orioles, and they fell short. They had a lot of injuries to key personnel. I thought their pitching staff was shaky from the get-go, but they ended up finishing last in the American League East, which was completely unexpected. Well, they made some changes. Obviously, they spent a lot of money on Alonso. The big thing, though, the club was sold. The Angelos family sold the team to David Rubenstein, who is a native Baltimorean, extremely wealthy guy. But he's not exactly a baseball guy. He's not. He knows a lot about finance, and hopefully he's going to stick with the people he has in charge and let the baseball people make those decisions. By the way, Orioles general manager Mike Elias went to the same high school that I attended, Thomas Jefferson High School in Fairfax County, Virginia, and I was there well before he was there. In fact, I couldn't get in there now because now it's a magnet school for smart kids. I was there when it first opened in 1964, 65. And when anybody could go there. But anyway, it was I mentioned that to Elias when he first got the job, and he looked at me, he says, "Yeah, but you went there when anybody could go." And I went, "Yeah, that's right." So thanks, pal. Anyway.
What is your assessment of him? Of Elias in general. I cannot get a read on him. I don't know.
Well, I tell you what, you're somewhat familiar, I'm sure, with the scandal that took place with the Astros, the whole issue with the Astros cheating scandal, and Mike Elias was an executive with the Astros. He was not running the show, but apparently, according to people heavily involved in Astros baseball, he was involved in the scandal to an extent. Helping to design the algorithm that allowed them to make certain coaching decisions. But nonetheless, before the scandal broke, he ended up getting the job with the Orioles. And obviously, he believes in the new metrics of the game, which pretty much, if you want to succeed in baseball these days, you have to understand how the new metrics work. And I think he's got some solid people around him. I think it's interesting when the Orioles decided to make their off-season managerial change. Actually, last year they fired Brandon Hyde, a move I completely disagreed with. I thought he was fine. But sometimes teams make coaching changes, managing changes for cosmetic reasons. And it's like, well, we have to do something to appease the fans. So they fired Hyde. And they ended up hiring a guy named Craig Albernaz, who, quite honestly, I'd never heard of. Longtime minor league guy and a young guy. And they brought in a new coaching staff largely and made some changes. And we'll see how it works out. I mean, it's too early in the season to really say that they're going one way or the other. I think the idea that they swept the White Sox, almost everybody sweeps the White Sox. I mean, it's just they're not real good. They're not really a contending team. But, the Alonso thing helps. It certainly sells tickets. I think defensively they're solid. Henderson is an all-star caliber player. Interesting that they invested so much in Adley Rutschman, and they signed this other catcher, Sammy Basayo, to another huge contract, and he's more of a catcher as well. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, who ends up as the number one guy in the next 3-4 years. But in general, and you mentioned the Orioles' last World Championship, 1983. Which, as we look at it now, is a long time ago. I mean, when you think about it, and I was here in Baltimore when they won that series. In the previous season, when it went down to the last game of the season against the Brewers, and Milwaukee ended up winning. But it still comes down to so much time has passed, and they've had ups and downs, and they had playoff appearances that went nowhere. And of course, if you remember the last year that Buck Showalter was the manager, and they won 47 games. 47 out of 162, a really, really dismal season.
Yeah.
And it just, So at that point in time, it made no sense to bring him back because the fans, I guess, felt like they weren't going anywhere with him. He got rid of Dan Duquette as well as the general manager. But just the same, we're still in a situation where you're changing a lot of faces, you're changing a lot of management, and you're starting from scratch. And so that's going to take a while. Now, obviously, a couple of years ago, they had some solid years, but right now they're in a situation where they're still in kind of transition, and they're in a very, very tough division.
They had to make the transition. I think I'm still conflicted on why they did it with Hyde. I do think it's a bit of a scapegoat as well. I think I'm just still surprised Elias survived squeaky clean like he did. How does he not take the culpability that Hyde did, etc. As well? So I think that was kind of weird to me. How like he's even going to hire a GM underneath of him, right?
Well,
correct. So I mean, he's definitely going to hire a GM. So how is it that Hyde took all the heat and he's the one that built the roster? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, one of the big differences these days, Charles, is the idea that you still have the title general manager, but you end up with someone who is also president of baseball operations, which is above the general manager. And so the general manager can make suggestions, but he doesn't quite have the power he used to have. Keep in mind, go back 100 years, 120 years in Major League Baseball, and you didn't have general managers then. You had business managers, the people who would sign the very meager checks that ball players were making back in those days. You look back at the advent of GMs, the advent of things like bench coaches, and keep in mind, pitching coaches, fairly new development. There were no pitching coaches in baseball in the 1930s and 40s. The pitchers all coached each other. The idea of having specific coaches, you had a manager and usually two coaches who were friends of the manager. I mean, it just the game has evolved over the years. What's particularly interesting to me anyway, is that when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, you'd look at a pitcher's won-loss record as if it was really meaningful, and you'd look at a batting average as if it was really meaningful. Now we look at it completely differently. It took years for baseball people to figure out that a starting pitcher has no impact at all on the number of runs his own team scores. And once they got rid of once they brought in the DH rule and pitchers stopped hitting, well, at that point in time, the pitcher really had no impact at all. When in the American League, when you had a DH in the National League, you still had pitchers hitting. Pitchers had such a tiny impact on their own team's ability to score runs. Finally, the National League adopted the DH as well. But still, it comes down to what's really important. And what's really important in baseball is scoring runs. It's getting on base. It's hitting for extra bases, which is why now the big stat is OPS, on base plus slugging percentage. How often does the player get on base and how many of his hits go for extra bases? It's all about producing offense now. And that's why when we look at last year in the National League, the batting champion hit 304 and nobody else hit 300. I mean, it was like 1968 when only one player in the American League batted 300, and it was Carl Yastrzemski of the Red Sox who hit 301, and everybody the next highest average was 290. But you look at things like home runs, runs batted in, runs scored, stolen bases, all these things which produce offense are far more important now than they were considered 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Right now, what we've seen, Trevor Rogers too. Why is nobody believing? I just did a stream. I just wrapped it up like right before the recording. This guy, the national media is not talking about how good this guy has been. I mean, under 2 runs, most valuable Oriole last year, on almost unhittable all season long. What do you think of Rogers so far?
Well, he's got good stuff. He's got good command of the strike zone. He's got a repertoire of 4 solid pitches. The big thing is he doesn't walk that many hitters, and he keeps the ball in the ballpark. I mean, it really comes down to, he's not getting the national ink that an Oriole fan thinks he probably deserves. But last year they finished last, and this year we're only a handful of games into the season. If we get to the All-Star break and he's got a solid earned run average, he's got a solid whip number, walks and hits per innings pitched, he'll start getting some ink. Look at who's right at this point in time. Tariq Skubal of the Tigers is considered the number 1 pitcher in the American League. And Paul Skeens of the Pirates is considered number one pitcher in the National League, but there are a lot of other guys who will have good seasons this year, will have good seasons in the future. But it comes down to, are their teams winning? Are their teams going to postseason play? Are their teams contending? Look at the number of pitchers we've seen traded at the trading deadline in order for one team to maybe get a leg up on a playoff spot. Bad teams will develop good players and end up trading them elsewhere. Orioles last year got rid of Ryan O'Hearn, and they traded him to the Padres, and then he was a free agent. Then he signed in the offseason with the Pirates. But he was having
who's hitting against both sides of the plate now, by the way, which they said he couldn't do. He's hitting. I mean, the Pirates are not taking him out on both sides.
Well, again, he's a guy who had bounced around a little bit before he got to Baltimore, but came of age, essentially, matured as a hitter with the Orioles. And obviously, whatever they got for him, again, was peanuts based upon what his worth is now.
One more thing with the Orioles is as well. So we see how good Rodgers has been as well. I just was talking about now the minor league system isn't what it was. This is, again, Mike Elias, his thing as well. Who do you think is coming up in the minor? Anybody like we're missing in the minors that could be coming up? Because I don't think they have any more cavalry now. This is it. This is what's here in terms of the guys.
I think you've got to go deeper than, let's say, AAA ball. I mean, they've got some solid prospects, players that they've drafted, but these are guys that aren't going to be ready for the big leagues for another couple of seasons. At this point in time, I think this roster is pretty much what you're going to see for the next couple of years. I mentioned that the situation with Rutschman and Sammy Basayo behind the plate. You know, there's a situation that because of the DH, you can play them both. But, you know, Rutschman last year offensively didn't produce the way he had produced the previous season. So he's got something to prove this season. I think the idea that they're going to have kind of a, I guess, rotating cast of characters in the middle infield. Obviously, Henderson's at shortstop, but Blaze Alexander, it looks really good at second base thus far, but he also plays third base. I think the idea that this outfield is fairly set at this point in time, but it still comes down to whether or not Craig Albernaz has certain tendencies against certain teams, against certain pitchers. Let's be honest here. We haven't seen enough of Craig Albernaz to know what his tendencies are, what his priorities are in terms of putting a lineup together. In terms of, obviously, we no longer have to worry about pitchers throwing complete games. I mean, geez, you know, I look back at 1975 when Jim Palmer threw 25 complete games. I mean, the whole league didn't throw 25 complete games last season. I mean, it's crazy. But these days, if now they're you know, we've gone from you want to get 7 innings out of your starter. Well, actually, if you get 6 innings, it's good. No, as long as they get 5 innings and qualify for the win. You know, where are we going with this? Look at the number of teams that have this attitude. Well, we'll go with an opener with a guy who will throw the first 1 or 2 innings. Then we'll bring our actual starter in the 3rd or 4th inning and hope he gets us to the 7th or 8th. I mean,
what do you think? I mean, Earl Weaver's gone, right? I mean, these managers now, like last year the Orioles had great churn on their roster because of all the injuries. I'm seeing it already this year, but I think this is kind of how they want to do things. Am I wrong about that? Or are they just roll them in, roll them out? Like you mentioned, all the different positions Alexander's playing. I mean, they don't really want to use a DH. It's not just Albernaz. I mean, I'm talking about all of baseball. Like 9 guys almost. You don't want to have it. They have to do rotisserie baseball everywhere. Go ahead.
Well, you don't. We've passed the point of where DHs are just aging players. When the DH rule started in 1973 in the American League, a lot of the DHs were guys well into their 30s who didn't have the physicality to play the field particularly well anymore. 1973, the best DH in the American League was Orlando Cepeda, who was late 30s, obviously an eventual Hall of Famer, but he was with the Boston Red Sox in a ballpark tailored for his swing. But even after that season, they didn't keep him. He ended up with the Kansas City Royals the following season. Then he was out of baseball. DH has become a position where you if you want to give a guy a rest, a day off, you let him DH for a day when he doesn't have to take the field, and then he can take his swings, take his at bats, and sit down for another half an hour before he has to go back out and swing the bat again. So it's it's the way it's worked out is not really much of a shock because it seems to be almost a relief for some of these guys to get the occasional day off where they only have to DH. But it still comes down to, the Orioles are a team, and you have to look at it from this. Last week, the team I covered for years, the Washington Nationals, played a series against the Los Angeles Dodgers, and the Dodgers ended up sweeping the series. Well, the Dodgers entered that series with a payroll of $400 million. The Nationals' payroll was $100 million. If the Nationals had won any of those games, it would have been a miracle. But see, that's what's happening throughout baseball. You have this disparity because there's no salary cap, and likely there may be one someday. I'm not sure it'll be in my lifetime, but it's the idea that without a salary cap, there are some teams that will do whatever they have to do to avoid spending money, or at least to avoid, I guess, the idea that dead money, because you don't want a situation where you've paid a guy and baseball contracts are fully guaranteed as opposed to the NFL contracts, which are not. A baseball contract which is fully guaranteed, and you've got, for instance, what's going on with the Orioles now. Zach Eflin makes a lot of money. Zach Eflin, starting pitcher, is making well over $10 million a year. Well, he's back on the 60-day disabled list with an injury. So that's 2 months off. He's still going to get his money.
He's Tommy John. John. He's not going to come back at all.
And recently had a situation where you had players re-signed to contract extensions. The Orioles just recently signed Shane Baz, another good young pitcher who's pitched well for the Orioles thus far, but he got signed to a contract extension. Well, the contract he was on already ran through 2028. Why would you extend him another 3 years? But they did, and I guess they're hoping and praying that doesn't turn into dead money.
The problem is you can't wait for him to become Turk Subel. Then you can't afford him.
Well,
so that's kind of the same thing with Basayo. Like if you don't do it now and he goes out and becomes an all-star, now it's $60 million a year, $70 million a year. Well, kind of what happened with Corbin Burns. Like they just couldn't be the highest bidder at that point.
The Burns thing, they dodged a bullet on because obviously he doesn't re-sign with the Orioles despite getting a attractive offer from the Orioles. Instead, he signs out west, and then he misses last season with an injury. So, I mean, there's money the Orioles likely would have happened had the Orioles re-signed him. That would have been dead money. It's when you look at and I'll bring this up because I covered baseball for 50 plus years. You get people all the time, casual fans, who complain about the amount of money that baseball players make. And then every so often there'll be some columnist somewhere who'll write a column saying that, baseball's a dying sport. Well, if it's a dying sport, why are all the franchises worth more than $1 billion now? When Peter Angelos bought the Orioles, 1993, he paid $173 million for them. And that seemed like an awful lot of money at that point in time. But the point is, when they sold to David Rubenstein, they sold for like $1.6 billion. I mean,
there's no way a Peter Angelos could buy. I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, there's no way because Peter Angelos wasn't this zillionaire guy. I mean, he was a lawyer, had a successful law practice, and had some real estate, and he borrowed some money.
Here's the thing. But Peter Angelos' law firm was part of the whole tobacco industry lawsuit. I mean, he ended up getting a lot of money in terms of legal fees when there was the class action settlement. So he had one of the issues that we heard about when he ended up buying the team was that suddenly he had hundreds of millions of dollars and still no one knew who he was. So buy a baseball team and by golly, everybody in town will know your name. So, it's like before Steve Bisciotti bought the Ravens from the Modells, who knew who Steve Bisciotti was? But he had loads of money. It goes to show you that a professional sports is obviously good business to be in. I mean, when I had the opportunity back in roughly 1974, 75 to be part of a team of a group that was going to buy a minor league baseball team in Norfolk, Virginia, called this was the franchise. And anyway, they were called the Peninsula Pilots back then. And they were going to be bought for $100,000, and I was going to be in for 10%. Well, they ended up getting sold to somebody else who offered more money. But the point is, the last time a Carolina League franchise was sold, it sold for millions of dollars. So, we're looking at low-level minor league baseball teams are worth millions of dollars now. You have the rebirth of the USFL as the United Football League when they merged with the XFL, and those players aren't making gobs of money, but the point is the owners of those teams are doing quite well. I mean, they have a television contract, and it's a matter of how this spring and summer football league develops over time. But professional sports has shown itself to be almost depression proof. You go back and you look at the history of attendance in Major League Baseball. The team that became the Baltimore Orioles was the St. Louis Browns, who were around in the American League between 1903 and 1953. But in the 30s, they had a couple of seasons when they drew fewer than 100,000 fans for the season, and nobody went out of business because the players weren't making much money to start with. So nowadays, of course, a starting pitcher who's not going to give you many complete games, and after about 150, 160 innings is probably done for the year, he's going to make 10 million plus if he's the fifth starter in a 5-man rotation. It's just the money's there, and obviously you want to win games. Well, it's all about starting pitching.
I got to ask you about the Nats here real quick, because the Nats, what's going on, man? Like, we would think that look, this has been, before recent times, we would consider them a good franchise. I mean, they had a good run. They had Strasburg and Scherzer and good starting pitching. And now this rebuild, which makes sense, like, because of financial reasons after the World Series win.
Yeah.
Still waiting, right? Still waiting on Dylan Cruz, etc.
Well, here's the thing about the Nats. They won it all in 2019, and it was a huge thrill for me. I was part of the broadcasts. I got a World Series ring, which was like, it became my Lifetime Achievement Award. So anyway, then came COVID, and in 2020, they had no opportunity to celebrate having won the World Series. A couple of players had become free agents and left. The idea that they could, capitalize on being world champions at the turnstiles didn't happen. You ended up playing a 60-game season, which is no season at all. I don't even view the 2020 season as being a legitimate season. But then in the long run, because they lost some of their better players, they had no season to build on. There's nobody in the stands in those 60 games in 2020 because they didn't sell tickets to those games. They were just on television. So anyway, everything that could have gone wrong with the Nationals went wrong. And eventually, of course, they finally fired the general manager, Mike Rizzo, and the field manager, Dave Martinez, and they brought in some new people. And they brought in some people who are much like what the Orioles did, some new people, some young people. Again, the Nationals hired a guy as manager, Blake Butera, who I had never heard of. And he's the age of my youngest daughter.
Managers are trending young all of a sudden, too. Like, for a while, we had Bochy and those guys, and we're kind of resurrecting. Now, in this last hiring cycle here, you see Albanez got a lot of young managers, the college manager that was hired in San Francisco. Yeah, so they happen real quick. Fascinating. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Phil.
Well, I was going to say, one thing all these new managers have in common, almost none of them ever played Major League Baseball. Some of them played minor league baseball before they got into coaching. But the point is, they weren't major league players. So they never made millions of dollars playing baseball, because guys who played Major League Baseball in the last 25 years who, when I started covering baseball in the early 1970s, and you had the minimum salary then was roughly $12,500 a year. Well, the minimum salary now is about $800,000 a year. I think, Charles, you and I could get by on $800,000 a year and never get a raise, never even ask for a raise. But
it's funny. Like Pujols, I know where you're going with that. Pujols is a guy that's really shown interest in managing, but for the most part, like you're right, a lot of these great players, they don't need to do it. They don't need to. They have no interest in work. That's why Cal Ripken, I think, never became. You don't need to. You don't need to work that hard.
And I've known Cal since he was in high school. But Cal came along, had a great career, and Cal made serious money playing shortstop and third base for the Orioles. But the point is, at this point in his life, he doesn't want the travel. He doesn't. And you mentioned Albert Pujols, who was a great player. He's going to be a Hall of Famer as soon as he's eligible. But the point is Albert Pujols going to take a minor league job for 2 or 3 years and then come to the major leagues and manage a club for $2 or $3 million? Of course not. When he's been making, $25 to $30 million as a player, these guys who had careers, who were notable all-star caliber players, they don't want the grind of managing a big league club or the small salary that they would have to make.
Well, and it's even true, and Chris Carter kind of talked about this, even in broadcasting now, where these guys don't need to do that either. I mean, they don't need to work that hard. I always make the joke, Tom Brady is doing the games on Fox. It was almost like tongue-in-cheek. If you pay me this ridiculous amount, then I'll do it. They actually gave him the ridiculous amount because it's Tom Brady. That's the only reason he's there. A lot of these guys are having $100,000, $200,000 a year just sitting at home doing autograph signings. Go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you what, Charles, the Brady thing, I'm glad you brought that up because I personally have an issue with that. And the issue I have with that is that he's also involved in management of the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, it's how do you have a guy as a network broadcaster who's also involved in ownership of a National Football League team? That just isn't right.
It's Tom Brady. That's why they're doing it. I mean, they're never going to say that out loud, but you and I both know, for most players, they have disallowed it before. They don't let guys vote.
You're a Baltimore guy, and I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with the Baltimore Blast, the indoor soccer team, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the Blast for many, many years were extremely popular, and they played at the Civic Center, the arena downtown Baltimore, and they would sell the place out. Well, now they play at the arena at Towson University, a much smaller arena. Mm-hmm. But when I'm in Baltimore doing sports talk radio in the mid-'80s, and the Blast are really, really popular, I made the point on the air that the way the major indoor soccer league was set up at that point in time, you had one guy who owned a team in each division. A guy named David Schoenstatt owned the New York team and he owned the Kansas City team. Now, I made the point on the air. I said, if it ends up being New York and Kansas City playing for the championship of the major indoor soccer league, you're not going to tell me that the owner of that team can't determine who the winner is going to be before the game starts. Because he's paying all the players on both teams. He's paying both coaches. I said that is the biggest conflict of interest I've ever seen. And I pointed out a historic precedent for that. Back in the 19th century, you had a situation where the same guy owned both the St. Louis and the Cleveland teams in the National League, the 1890s. And he ends up taking the best players off the Cleveland team and moving them to the St. Louis team. Well, the Cleveland team was called the Cleveland Spiders back in the 19th century. And the Spiders had a season where they only won 27 games. They ended up playing most of their games on the road because no one was going to their home games. They were so bad. But finally, baseball ruled you can't own two teams in the same league.
Yeah, that's I think it's – go ahead.
No, let me just say, the Blast management jumped all over me for bringing that up. And they said, well, nobody cares about that. I said, well, I care about that. I said, I think from an ethical standpoint, that makes no sense at all. Anyway.
I could see Drew Forster and Ed Hale calling you about that in the 80s. I think it's kind of a lost thing how big it was in Baltimore when I was a kid in the 80s. the
Oh yeah.
Baltimore Blast. I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that they were as big as the Orioles. I mean,
Well,
almost.
the point is that they came along and they had a very charismatic coach in Kenny Cooper, and some young Baltimore kids who played on that team, and so many of those players from the '80s Blast teams still live in Baltimore. It's remarkable how many of them stayed, but it's one of those things. It was promoted like rock and roll. I mean, it was the. I made the point frequently that if you stood outside the Baltimore Arena after a Blast game and asked the fans coming out what the score was, most of them had no idea what the score was. It was a matter of
music. The music and the Blast game kind of predated what you see in MLB and NBA. Like nowadays, they didn't all do that then. Like you go to an Oriole game, they would have the charge. There'd be some stuff, but the Blast, they'd have the music rolling the whole time.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, every time. My wife was a big Blast fan, and every time we're like in a grocery store and they're playing oldies and they play almost anything by Kool and the Gang, she starts dancing in the aisle. She says, "This is a Blast song." So anyway, I never got into I never got into the whole indoor soccer thing. To me, it was like
The Celebrations to me is the Blast song that I have. Celebrate. Yeah. That was the one for me, the Blast. I'd be remiss not to talk to you about media. What's going on right now? We'll get to what you're doing right now, but Masson now one channel. You actually worked at Masson. Full disclosure, I've never liked Masson outside of the broadcast because I was always so disappointed because they never really did much with it. They really just they're doing games and they're not really interested. It's taken them all these years to figure out, right, that okay, you want to do minor league games and preseason and spring training games. So where are we at? Not necessarily Masson, but in general in media and sports media. What do you think? What's going on?
I'll address the Masson thing first because I worked for Masson for a number of years. I'll say this: their checks never bounced. They always paid on time. But the point that you made, which is the most significant point of all, you had a regional sports network, yet you had a lot of just dead programming on. I mean, you look at the Yes Network where the Yankees and the Nets are on it, and you look at the New England Sports Network with the Red Sox and the Bruins, and these networks have programming on all the time, and a lot of it is locally focused. It's not just something you've pulled down off some syndicate, and Masson just never wanted to spend the money on doing other local shows. I did a show on Masson, an afternoon show called the Mid-Atlantic Sports Report, for 10 years.
I watched it.
And and again, it was about the Orioles and it was about the Nationals. We would occasionally talk about the football teams and the hockey team in Washington, but it still was mostly a baseball show. And then I did a Saturday morning show called Nats Talk with my friend Mike Wallace, who Mike was a major league pitcher back in the 1970s. And it was a fun show to do, but it was, how can I put this? There was a lot of repetition on that show. But there was really nothing else like it in the area, a 90-minute daily Monday through Friday show that addressed the local sports scene. But it could have been so much more than that. And there were a lot of things that we just, we would have loved to have been able to do, but never got around to doing it. I mean, it came down to finances really. And I can assure you, I did not get rich doing the Mid-Atlantic Sports Report, but it was an interesting exercise for me because at the time, because I did the Nationals radio post-game show for a long, from 06 through 2019. And so when we're doing, and we did the Mid-Atlantic Sports Report from 2011 through 2020, but the show was on from 5 to 6:30. So at 6:30, and I'm in Cockeysville, Maryland, where the studios were, and I run out to the parking lot, get in my car, and I drive down to Washington, to Nationals Park. And I would always miss the first 2 or 3 innings. I had to keep, catch up on my scorebook. And then I would sit through the rest of the game. Then I would go and do the post-game radio show from the left field concourse and get back in my car and drive back to my house in Baltimore County. And I did that for years and years and years. And really, doing the show, the radio show was a total pleasure. The drive back and forth, not so much.
I didn't know that they're not. I thought that the show was in the warehouse. I did not know that was the case.
Everybody thought that. But we were in the Sinclair building in Cockeysville, Maryland, which was right off of 83 North.
I know right where that was at. I used to work out in Hunt Valley near you. You weren't that far from McCormick building out there.
Right, that's right. They were right
in McCormick. Yeah, you're not that
far. They were right around the corner. Well, when I first moved to Baltimore, I bought a house in Cockeysville, and I lived on Cedar Vale Court in Cockeysville, Maryland, and then we moved further out into the county when I got married. But anyway, it was the studio was fine, and the production values were kind of on the cheap. But the point is, the show lasted for 10 years before they finally pulled the plug on it.
But one thing I don't understand, and this is just a legitimate question from somebody watching. Why couldn't they do better? I mean, how much of a spend is it for a talk show? Or even nowadays, you have social media podcasts. I mean, how much would that cost you compared to just running FanDuel, like I'm seeing? When you're running FanDuel shows, or you're running any other kind of syndication, there's a flat fee to pay, and you're just picking the programming up off of a satellite dish. Whereas when you're doing a locally produced show, you have the talent on the show, and it's usually four guys in the studio. Sometimes it'll be 3 guys and a woman. You have a show producer. You have someone who handles audio. You have people who run camera, although we usually use the robotic cameras in the studio, but still somebody in the control room had to run those. So you end up with a staff of people that you have to pay. There's no one's working for free, and no one's working for an hourly rate of a minimum wage. It's one of those things where you have salaries to pay, and then you're also doing those Saturday morning shows. Nats Talk was on first, and then Tom Davis would do the Orioles talk show. The idea that you had any kind of budget to do that show, it was always going to be fairly limited. There were a lot of times when if somebody was out sick or had some other assignment to do, they would just go with 3 people. And really, they probably should have done that from the start, because I think 3 people was enough, because sometimes we would go through an entire segment and only 2 of us would actually be speaking. I agree. I think like in a half-hour format, I would agree with that. I think sometimes 4 is a bit much. So you're retired now, more or less, right? As far as from media, so you're teaching yes. Young people in terms of that. At can I say the name of the school? Did you?
Sure. Austin Peay State University.
Austin Peay State University, teaching media. Boy, we were talking off camera. These young people really don't know how hard this is. There's a lot of people like me who wanted to be in media and went off and got real jobs. I mean, it's really hard to really make a success of this, is whatever. So obviously you did more than anybody else. I mean, more than most people in media that study media. What are you seeing now with young people out here these days in a whole different landscape of social media and all that?
The popularity of doing podcasts surprises me a little bit, because obviously in order to have a successful podcast, somewhere along the line, you've got to find some sponsors, because otherwise you're not going to make any money at all. It's not totally unlike what a number of people have done, which is, for instance, if you're in a market like Baltimore, say, and there's a radio station that has a decent signal but doesn't have any sports programming, well, you can go to the general manager of that station or to the business manager of that station and say, look, I'd like to buy a 2-hour block on Saturday mornings. And you agree on a price, and suddenly you've got 2 hours of broadcast time on a Saturday morning on a radio station with a decent signal. Now, you've got to supply the content, but you're also the producer of that show. Chances are there'll be somebody there to run your board for you from the radio station, but suddenly you're in a situation where you've got 2 hours of time to sell. You've got commercials that you can sell to various different sponsors. You can voice those commercials yourself. You don't have to pay for a production staff to make those commercials. And suddenly you've got income coming in from the commercials. Now, if you've paid, hypothetically speaking, if you've paid $500 an hour for the broadcast, that's $1,000 outlay to start with on a Saturday morning. Well, let's say you've got 12 minutes of commercial time in each hour. Well, let's say you're charging, $150, or let's say a flat $100 a commercial. Well, that's $1,200 each hour. So that's $2,200. So suddenly you're making a profit of $1,200 on, and you're spending $1,000 for the airtime. So it's called brokering a show. You buy the time and then you resell the time, but you're the talent on that show. Now, listen, Austin Peay is located in Clarksville, Tennessee, which is a town of about 200,000 people. It's about 40 minutes northwest of Nashville, very close to the Kentucky border. And there's a guy named Greg Walker who is deceased now, but I'll say for 20 plus years, he did a radio show 3 times a week on a local radio station that he owned the show. He bought the time and sold the time. He lived in a big old house. He had 2 cars. He'd raised a family. I mean, obviously, he had success doing it because he was personable and he was able to sell the commercial time to local sponsors. So if you've got any skill set at all in terms of your personality, in terms of your presentation, to sell yourself, well, the point is you can make some money, and it's one way to get your foot in the door of doing a local radio show. Now, take a guy in Baltimore like Tom Davis.
Tom Davis is, I was thinking about Tom Davis. He's the guy that's still doing it, right? On massive.
He's doing it on television. And he's been doing it for years on television, and he's been extremely successful doing it because Tom is, and Tom Davis, I'll say, is one of my best friends in the world. He's just a prince of a fellow, but here's a guy who has got a real knack for conversation. And so he goes to various sponsors. He's got some sponsors on his television show he's had for 25 years. He just has to call them up now and says, I'm doing it. I don't know what, show.
He's got that same bank. I don't know. I forget the name of it, but he's at that same bank for like 20 some years. Yeah, you're right.
And he's got Pete Cycle, and he's got a Toyota dealer. I mean, he's got some really prominent sponsors. And so if you've got that skill, that gift of gab where you can sell yourself, and I tell my students all the time, listen, you want to be on the radio, you want to be on television, the people making the real money are the ones selling the commercials. Salespeople in media make gobs of money. So it's a matter of, doing a podcast is great, but if you don't have an audience for it, it's like people who say, well, I'm going to write a blog and I'll make money on the blog. Well, who's going to pay you for doing it? You've got to have sponsors to do it, and the sponsors aren't going to be interested unless you can show that you've got an audience. So you have to get clicks on your blog, on your YouTube channel, whatever you're doing, and hope for the best. But I mean, it's a matter of trying to make a living in a very, very tough business to start with. I mean, I was very lucky.
He has always been, I think a lot of people don't understand it. It's always been like people look at Stephen A. Smith. That's not what usually happens. Well, you usually don't get a $20 million deal. Like that's 1 in a million.
And Charles, let me tell you the downside of that, because Stephen A. Smith, exceptionally talented guy, very, very smart guy. But these kids come along in class and they say, well, I want to do what he's doing. And I said, well, there's already somebody doing that. Him. You can't, because it's the idea you can't go in and copy anybody else because people are going to say, well, he's just trying to be Stephen A. Smith. We've already got a Stephen A. Smith. Maybe we need a Charles Harris. I mean, it really comes down to having a presentation, having something compelling about your personality, about your skill set. Because what I found out is that the biggest the greatest skill set you need is the ability to provide content. When WTEM went on the air in 1992, and their big thing was they had the rights to the Washington Redskins games. But they spent all their money to get the rights to those games, and they didn't have any money to spend on promoting the radio station. And the
signal was terrible.
Well, the signal was awful. You are correct.
And you couldn't sell it because you couldn't hear it, like in certain places.
Yeah. Well, if you were across the street, if you were at White Flint Mall, you could hear it. But I'm asked to do 5-hour shows, and 5-hour shows when you're not getting calls from listeners, it's just crazy. I mean, but what I showed in doing those shows was that I could talk for 5 hours. I could present comments. I could present histories. I could present enough compelling content that I could draw an audience. And eventually some people would call in, but not everybody would call in. And the idea that you could always get a guest, you can't always get a guest. Sometimes it's a little tough to get a guest. And so it's a matter of I could talk and not repeat myself. And I found out when I was in college, I had a professor in college because I went to Austin Peay, and I had a double major, history and English, and I minored in sociology. And my history professor was a man named Preston Hubbard. And Preston J. Hubbard was on the Bataan Death March during World War II. He was a legitimate World War II hero. And but for whatever reason, he loved baseball. And so he and I would talk baseball, talk about the baseball teams he had seen growing up in the 1930s and 40s. And anyway, as I was about to graduate, he said, I want you to go to law school. And I went, are you kidding me? Law school? He said, yes. I said, why? Why in the world would you want me to go to law school? He says, because he says, you're the only kid I've ever had. He says, I've been teaching here since 1955. I can't think of another kid that I can throw any topic at him in the world, and he can go off on it for 30 minutes and never repeat himself. He says, I think you'd be great in a courtroom. And I said, well, I'm terribly flattered, but I said, after 4 years of college, I think I'm done. Said,
do you have a photographic memory? I've heard that said about you several times.
I wouldn't call it photographic. I would call it above average. Okay. My father had a great memory as well. So I think it's somewhat genetic, but Dr. Hubbard said to me, as I was just about to graduate, he said, and he pointed his finger at me. He said, no, mark my words, you're going to end up doing something that's going to require you to talk for a long time. And he was right, because that's exactly what I ended up doing. So I've been, obviously, I had a 46-year career in broadcast.
That stuff there. That's my daughter. Say hi. Yeah, there you go. All right. So you're the guy with the photographic memory and everything like that. Not photographic memory, but above average.
Yeah, I would say my memory is above average, although my grades in school were very average. People said, well, you must have been like on the dean's list. If I'd ever made the dean's list, my parents would have keeled over dead. But see, the other thing I did, Charles, was that I played guitar in rock and roll bands from high school all through college. And I was, I did most of the singing in the bands I was in, and I could remember the lyrics.
I've never heard this.
My ability to remember song lyrics helped in my ability to remember facts about sports. And the point is, if you can, like I had a student several years ago who was a non-traditional student. He was in his 40s, but he decided he was going to go to school. He's going to go to Austin Peay, and he's going to get his degree, and he was going to become a sportscaster. And so one day after class, I said, what gave you the idea that you could be a sportscaster? He says, well, my friends have always told me that I know more about football than anybody they've ever met in their life. And I went, well, suppose they're all lying to you. And he goes, well, I hadn't thought about that. I said, well, tell you what, I'm going to ask you 5 questions about the National Football League. And if you can answer these questions, I'll say you're solid. He says, okay, go ahead. Well, the first question I asked him was, what year did the NFL start? Had no clue. He went like 1895. I said, no, 1920. Okay. I asked him the team that currently in Arizona. Where did they play before that? And he goes, well, they've always
St.
been there. I
Louis.
said, no, they were in St. Louis before that. And I said, before they were in St. Louis, they were in Chicago. They were the Chicago Cardinals.
I got that one. The other one.
And so, I mean, I went on. The Washington Redskins began in another city. What city was that? He didn't know. Boston. They were the Boston they were the Boston Braves and changed their name to Boston Redskins when they moved to Fenway Park. But he got all 5 questions wrong. And anyway, he ended up dropping out. And I ran into him like 2 years later at a Walmart in Clarksville. And he came over to me and he said, do you remember me? I said, of course I do. And he said, you really set me straight. I said, well, I'm glad I saved you the money of tuition for a few years. Anyway.
This was exactly what I expected, man. You are, I say goats in the building as well. And I just want to best of luck in everything you're doing as far as your retirement as well. I know you're this is usually why I say promote what you're doing. I think you're trying to stay off the grid a little bit, right, these days.
Well, the point is, I've done a number of Austin Peay baseball games for ESPN Plus, which is fun, and it pays nothing, but it's fun. And I guess the big thing is I am grateful that I had the opportunity to do what I did, and I got to interact with the people I was able to interact with. I married the right woman. We just celebrated our 38th wedding anniversary. My children, my daughters are grown up, and they both have master's degrees. My older daughter plays bass in a band on the West Coast, but she also is a senior editor for a book publisher out there. And by the way, she went to Towson, and she was the baseball beat writer for the Tower Light, which is the campus paper.
I know.
And my younger daughter is the content manager for the publications of the Maryland Center for History and Culture in downtown Baltimore. So it's a very, very joyful life. And it was a pleasure to meet you. And by the way, I've been in Winchester many, many times. When I drive between Baltimore County and Clarksville, Tennessee, I drive right through Winchester on 81.
I knew you were going to say it was a long trip. That's usually what people say, like they drive through, or they take the long trip through Winchester. Thank you very much. This guy is actually, for me, it was an honor in every sense. Watching Phil Wood, I watched Phil Wood, listening to Phil Wood ever since I was little. I'm sure a lot of you did. So want to thank you for taking the time for coming on. Thank you very much. Also to check this out. NFL draft coverage is coming up as well, pre and post the draft, so definitely check that out. So thank you very much for joining us here on our Ravori Sports Conversation. You guys have a great rest of your day.